She didn't even make it 3 steps into the restaurant before the room decided who she was. That look hit her instantly. Not curiosity, not confusion, just that familiar calculating scan white staff used like a weapon, the silent measurement of a black woman's worth based on nothing but skin. Amara Holt walked in with the quiet confidence of someone who had built her reputation on precision. Deep ebony skin, shoulder-length 4C hair in a defined twist-out, cream silk blouse, tailored charcoal blazer, minimalist gold earrings that whispered wealth instead of screaming it. And the posture of a woman who had nothing to prove to anyone in the room. But to them, she was already a problem. The hostess froze mid-sentence, lips parted, eyes wide, the look you give when something unexpected enters a space you believe belongs to you. A waitress behind the counter whispered to another, "Is she lost?" The bartender didn't even whisper. He laughed under his breath and muttered loud enough for her to hear. "Not in this place." And that was before she even said a single word. She hadn't asked for a menu. She hadn't asked for pricing. She hadn't asked for a seat. But they had already placed her beneath everyone else in the restaurant. The white-only hierarchy they pretended didn't exist, but performed with muscle memory. She walked up to the hostess stand. "I'd like a table," Amara said calmly. The hostess didn't ask for her name, didn't check the system, didn't even pretend to follow the training manual printed in the drawer in front of her. She just tilted her head toward the back corner, the cheapest, dimmest part of the entire establishment, and pointed like she was directing a stray animal. "There," she said, "that section is more comfortable." More comfortable? Translation: that's where we put people like you. Amara didn't blink. She'd seen this scene too many times to waste emotion on it. But the restaurant wasn't done. They had no idea the black woman they were trying to hide was the one person in the entire industry they should have feared. Amara let the silence hang, then nodded and walked toward the table they tried to bury her in. A dark corner between a storage cabinet and a dying plant that hadn't been watered in months. White diners around her got real smiles. Sparkling water. Wine samples. Little welcome speeches that sounded like commercials. She got none of it. A white couple at the bar stared at her like she'd crashed a wedding she wasn't invited to. The man leaned in and whispered, "These places really need stronger dress codes." She almost laughed. Her outfit cost more than their weekend vacation. But she wasn't here to correct anyone. She was here to evaluate. She placed her handbag, structured black leather, simple, elegant, on the table and looked around the restaurant like she was studying a crime scene. Because in a way, she was. Amara Holt wasn't just any diner. She wasn't another customer the staff could ignore. She was the most feared food critic in the entire region. The one whose reviews could elevate a restaurant to national fame, or bury it so deep not even a rebrand could save it. However, the staff didn't know that, because she was anonymous. And today, she wasn't giving them a warning, she was giving them a mirror. A waitress eventually walked over, not with a menu, not with water, but with a sigh. "Are you, waiting for someone?" she asked, eyes scanning Amara's face like she couldn't possibly be there alone by choice. "No," Amara replied. "I'd just like the menu." The waitress lifted a brow. "Okay, but just so you know, this is a fine dining space. The prices here are—" She paused, smirked and dropped her voice. "Significantly higher than the places you might be used to." Amara almost smiled. Ignorance always announced itself loudly, but she wasn't here to argue. She was here to watch. She continued taking mental notes. The peeling wallpaper near the bar, the uneven lighting, the lack of diversity among staff, the overconfident arrogance that often came from restaurants that relied on reputation instead of quality. A white family walked in. Instant greetings, instant wine suggestions, instant smiles. She watched the contrast like a pathologist studying a disease under a microscope. Then, as the waitress walked away, Amara leaned back and took out her phone, not to call anyone, not to complain, but to begin a private log. "Time of entry, 7:01 p.m., she typed. Staff behavior, discriminatory before engagement. She wrote quickly, efficiently, clinically, but she wasn't done. She glanced at the bar. The bartender was still laughing quietly, puff shaking his head like her presence was the best entertainment he had all night. He had no idea he was sealing his own fate. Halfway through her notes, she paused, looked directly into the imaginary camera the documentary audience would be watching through, and said, gently, calmly, deliberately, "If you're watching this and you love these kinds of real, raw stories, hit that subscribe button. These are the moments the world pretends don't happen, and I'm going to keep exposing them." Then she put her phone down, folded her hands, and waited. Because another part of the performance was coming, the part where the staff pretended they weren't racist, just busy, and she would document every second of it. What none of them knew was that a single email she sent tonight could cost them everything. Amara glanced at the clock. The manager was about to discover her reservation. The dining room was about to shift, and the staff who mocked her, dismissed her, and tried to hide her were minutes away from realizing they had insulted the wrong black woman. A woman whose name held weight, a woman whose pen held power, a woman who never raised her voice, because she never needed to. The room just didn't know it yet, but they were about to, because the next person to walk through the restaurant doors would expose everything. Amara Holt sat at the corner table, composed. The moment she lowered her gaze to the menu, the performance began. The staff behind the counter huddled, whispering, glancing at her every few seconds, audibly calculating her worth, or what they assumed her lack thereof. "She's only ordering water," one muttered. "People like her never stay long," another added, laughing softly, as if their amusement could erase her presence. Amara heard it all. Every word, every tone, every laugh was designed to humiliate, to minimize, to make her feel small in a room that didn't want her there. Yet she didn't flinch. What they didn't realize was that every insult, every eye roll, every whispered joke was being logged in her mind, and it wasn't just for her own record. The waiter returned with the menu, placing it down with an exaggerated flourish, almost as if presenting it to a child who had wandered into a room meant for adults. Amara's fingers brushed the smooth paper lightly, her movements deliberate, calm, and confident. The restaurant itself felt like a stage now. Every gesture of disdain, every condescending glance, every subtle act of segregation was part of a performance, and she was the silent judge. A couple of servers laughed again, just loud enough for her to hear, the sound carrying like a challenge. She looked around, eyes steady, unflinching, as she began her assessment. Lighting that dimmed the corners where black patrons were often directed, staff training focused on pleasing certain demographics while ignoring others, and menus placed strategically to prevent certain guests from seeing premium selections. This was more than poor service. It was intentional, systemic, racist. Amara's gaze flicked to the bartender. White, tall, brown hair slicked back, clean cut, dressed in a black vest and crisp white shirt. He leaned against the bar, chuckling under his breath, shaking his head at her as though she were a joke. The subtle arrogance, the air of assumed superiority, it all made her smile faintly, a predator who knew the prey was unaware. Every laugh, every eye roll, every whispered insult was about to become evidence. She sipped her water slowly, deliberately. Her presence alone caused unease among the staff, though they tried not to show it. The room had shifted, even without knowing why. Amara took mental notes. The uneven attention given to guests, the slow responses when she waved for service, the way the staff's body language betrayed discomfort when forced to approach her. She wrote it all down, precise, meticulous. The kind of notes that don't just tell a story, they tell the truth. She observed the diners around her, noting their obliviousness. They didn't see the performative racism. They just saw a black woman sitting quietly, requesting service, being difficult only in their imagination. She looked back at the table where she had been directed, the farthest from the bar, the dimmest lighting, near a drying plant. The positioning was no accident. It was a strategy, the attempt to minimize, to erase her. The staff continued, unknowing of her awareness. The white manager, tall, middle-aged, brown hair combed to the side, wearing a navy suit that screamed authority, walked past the dining room toward the back office. He passed by her table without a glance, confident that the situation was under control. He didn't know that the woman he ignored was the most feared critic in the country. Amara's eyes followed him. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She simply recorded. What the staff didn't know was that in less than 10 minutes the same people laughing at her would be fighting to keep their jobs. and no apology would undo what was coming. She leaned back in her chair, calm, composed, confident. Every aspect of her presence, from the way her blazer draped, to the tilt of her head, to the measured movements of her hands, projected authority without saying a word. The bartender glanced again, smirk fading slightly. The waitress hovered near the counter, checking herself in the reflection of the window. Amara could feel their discomfort like static in the air. She had arrived not just to eat, not just to observe. She had arrived to expose. The subtle arrogance that had defined the staff's behaviour, the not in this restaurant smirk, the whispered jokes, the assumed inferiority, was about to collide with the weight of her reputation. Amara Holt wasn't just a guest. She wasn't just a black woman dining quietly. She was the most feared critic in the country, and the staff's performance tonight would be documented for the world to see. And when the manager finally realized who was sitting in that corner, everything would change, instantly. Every laugh, every eye roll, every condescending gesture would have consequences. Meanwhile, the restaurant hummed with the usual clinking of cutlery, murmured conversations, and occasional laughter. Except it was slightly off tonight, subtle, almost imperceptible. The staff's behaviour had shifted since Amara sat down, a ripple of unease passing through the room, though they didn't yet understand why. Behind the counter, whispers escalated. "Did you see her handwriting in the notebook?" one server muttered, mostly to reassure himself. "She's definitely here to judge us," another replied, tension threading through his voice. Amara made no move to show what she was recording. Her pen flowed across the page with precision, documenting everything. The misplaced menus, the intentionally slow responses, the way the smiles and gestures were reserved only for the white tables. Every action became a data point, a fact, a record that could not be ignored. The restaurant manager, white, mid-40s, neatly combed brown hair, a navy suit with a faint pinstripe, the type of man whose authority depended on assumptions of control, strolled confidently into the dining room. He carried a clipboard, thinking he was entering a room where he ruled, where his authority was absolute. His steps faltered when his gaze landed on her. It started subtly. His eyes widened slightly. His jaw tightened. He had not expected anyone like her in this section. Certainly not Amara Holt, sitting in the far corner where problem guests were usually sequestered. At that moment, the manager realized he didn't just underestimate a guest. He had underestimated the most powerful woman in the restaurant industry. Amara looked up from her notebook, her eyes steady and unwavering. Her presence alone seemed to crack the manager's confidence, though she didn't speak a word. He scanned the room, trying to gauge how serious this could be, but every staff member avoided his gaze. He had no idea that the room had been silently assessing him too, not just him, but the entire hierarchy of assumed superiority. He moved closer, clipboard in hand, clearing his throat. "Miss Holt, I didn't expect you to be here," he stammered, realizing the error in both recognition and protocol. Amara tilted her head slightly, still writing. Her calm demeanour contrasted sharply with the rising panic in the manager. Her deep brown eyes flicked to him, just long enough to convey quiet authority without a single syllable. He swallowed hard, realizing he was late, very late. Everything he thought he controlled in this room, every assumption, every gesture, every policy, was about to crumble under her gaze. The staff around the dining room began to sense the power shift. The white waiter who had rolled his eyes earlier now moved hesitantly toward her table, unsure if he should approach. The bartender, who had chuckled under his breath at her entrance, now avoided making eye contact, fidgeting with bottles as if they could hide him. Amara Holt, the national food critic, the woman whose reviews had destroyed empires and elevated unknown chefs, sat quietly. Her pen moved, documenting the room in real time. Every whisper, every smirk, every condescending glance was recorded, as if the room itself was under scrutiny. The manager tried to speak again, forcing a smile. "Can I get you anything?" he asked, voice slightly higher than usual, betraying his nerves. Amara didn't respond immediately. She simply set her pen down, looked up and said in a soft but commanding tone, "Just water for now. Thank you." Every second of delay, every forced politeness was a reminder that the arrogance displayed earlier was not just unwise, it was dangerous. The manager stepped back, heart racing. He could feel the gravity of the situation, though he didn't yet understand the full extent. He turned to his staff, eyes wide, and muttered, "Make sure everything is perfect for Miss Holt." The problem? Perfect wouldn't erase what had already happened. Amara's notebook was full. Every slip, every microaggression, every performative act of superiority had been captured. She didn't just take notes, she collected evidence. Evidence that, once published, would expose systemic disrespect, subtle and overt, toward black patrons in establishments that prided themselves on class and refinement. Amara glanced briefly at the camera she imagined, addressing viewers silently but directly. If you want to see more stories about how black people navigate spaces that were never meant for us, hit subscribe. You'll see the truth behind the smiles and the silence, and why no one is safe when we start observing. Back in the restaurant, the manager's posture shifted completely. Shoulders stiff, forehead glistening, he now realized the enormity of the oversight. The staff's prior smugness had evaporated, replaced by anxiety. The whispered jokes, the subtle positioning, the assumption that Amara was not one of us, every single one of them now threatened to undo the restaurant's reputation overnight. Amara looked up once more, deep brown eyes meeting his for a brief second. It was not a look of anger. Not a look of vengeance. It was simply recognition. Recognition that he had made a grave miscalculation and that the consequences were already in motion. The room held its collective breath. Amara returned to her notes, pen gliding across the page. Every staff member in the vicinity shifted nervously, aware that the calm in the corner was more potent than the panic racing through their veins. And then she closed her notebook, gently, deliberately. The snap of the cover echoed like a gavel in the room. She had the power now, not by raising her voice, not by demanding attention, but simply by existing in a space that had tried to erase her presence and documenting everything with clinical precision. The manager approached again, trying to regain composure. His voice was strained, his tone far too loud for the subtlety of the moment. "Miss Holt, may I explain?" Amara looked up, one eyebrow slightly raised. There's nothing to explain. Observing is enough. In that moment, every whispered joke, every condescending gesture, every assumption about her worth would be rewritten. The only thing left was the pen, and she held it in her hand. Amara Holt didn't rise from her corner table. She didn't slam the menu down. She didn't raise her voice or demand attention. She simply remained still, composed, the way she had learned to navigate every space that wasn't designed for black women like her. Her dark, radiant skin glimmered under the restaurant's soft, ambient lighting. Her shoulder-length twist-out framed a face that could calm storms. Deep brown eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the room silently. Cream silk blouse tucked neatly into charcoal-tailored pants. Minimalist gold earrings glinted subtly. Every detail is intentional. Every inch of her posture was a statement of quiet power. The staff, still jittery from the manager's earlier realization, watched her like a caged animal might watch a predator. They didn't yet know the magnitude of the weapon sitting quietly before them, her pen. Every slip, every misstep, every condescending smile or whispered comment had been documented. She had notes on the servers' jokes, their eye rolls, and the way they tried to redirect her to the corner like she was invisible. She had recorded the subtle hierarchy of whiteness in motion, and she had a full account of the manager's failure to intervene. What they thought was a harmless display of arrogance would soon become the most dangerous thing in their restaurant, and it wasn't them. And in that moment, they realized. The woman they had laughed at, the woman they had tried to hide, held the power to define their fate. Amara didn't leave immediately after finishing her notes. She observed further, analyzing the room, the hierarchy, and the subtle power plays. She wanted to make sure she captured every angle, every reaction. Black people had learned to survive in spaces built for others by observing, by understanding every nuance, by documenting every injustice. This was no different. She took a small sip of water, not hurriedly, but with poise. The manager, still flustered, approached again. "Miss Holt, can I provide anything?" His voice wavered. She set her pen down deliberately and looked at him. Her eyes, deep brown, unwavering, met his with a clarity that cut through his nervous energy. "No," she said simply. "Observing is enough." The arrogance they had worn like armor had no defense against her calm. The only weapon she needed was observation and a pen. By the time she left that night, the staff's anxiety had only deepened. The manager had spent the evening trying to anticipate what she would say. The whispers, the jokes, the assumed hierarchies, all recorded, all exposed, all ready to dismantle reputations in a single article. If you want to see more stories about the hidden battles black people face in spaces built for others, hit subscribe. Learn how quiet observation and strategy can turn the tables in ways people never see coming. The next morning, her article went live. The headline alone was enough to send shivers through the industry. Disrespect on the menu, a night of racial profiling at Mkirberth restaurant. Reservations plunged within hours. Investors called in, demanding explanations. Media outlets picked up the story, amplifying the narrative of microaggressions, neglect, and racial bias. The restaurant's exclusive image, carefully curated over decades, evaporated in 24 hours. And just like that, the arrogance that had filled the room the night before became their downfall. Amara's review didn't just criticize the food. It criticized the culture, the environment, and the assumptions embedded in every corner of the restaurant. It called out how whiteness moved freely while blackness was treated as an inconvenience, an obstacle to be managed or hidden away. Every line, every paragraph carried the weight of lived experience and expertise. The staff who had laughed, the manager who had assumed control, all saw their careers tremble. They didn't just discriminate against a guest, they had attempted to erase the presence of a black woman who controlled the narrative of the entire industry. Yet Amara didn't gloat. She didn't throw insults or demand apologies. She let her words do the work. Her power was quiet but absolute. Her authority was earned through skill, observation, and the ability to expose truths that others would rather remain hidden. They thought she was powerless. They thought they could hide their prejudice. But power doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be recognized when it walks in the room. By the time the week ended, changes were already in motion. Staff were retrained, policies rewritten, and apologies issued. The restaurant had no choice but to acknowledge what they had ignored. The quiet strength and influence of a black woman who refused to be invisible. Amara Holt had transformed an ordinary dining experience into a moment that would be remembered industry-wide. She had done it not with anger or confrontation, but with observation, documentation, and the pen, the ultimate weapon in her arsenal. They thought she didn't belong. They thought she wasn't worthy. But Amara Holt held the pen, in the hands of a black woman who sees, hears, and remembers, is the most dangerous weapon in the room.